So briefly, I'm going to give a little bit of a prelude about 350 Bay Area, but Dave Rosenfeld is our presenter. I'm so excited. I have seen this presentation before and I absolutely was blown away. So I think everybody's going to really enjoy what we're doing here. And just to give you some context, this is really the kickoff of 350 Bay Area's energy equity campaign, where we really target PG&E in particular, because we're in the Bay Area, and ask them to withhold or to uphold their agreement. So hang on one sec. Just so briefly, whoops, let's get this kind of messed up here. Just to kind of quickly go through what 350 Bay Area is. Most of the people here know this. We really have been successfully building a grassroots climate movement in the Bay Area and also at the state level to eliminate carbon pollution, to achieve a clean energy future with all of the justice. This is an eye chart. I'm not going to read it to you, but we have a side that focuses more on lobbying and a side that focuses on policy. And then we have our local groups that are basically at the county level throughout the Bay Area. And our goals really are to provide clean, safe, reliable, affordable energy for everybody, along with clean transportation and clean buildings, accelerating the fossil fuel end game, and really reducing incredibly toxic air pollution. So we are so excited to be launching this campaign to push for affordable, clean, and reliable electricity. And this little guy down here, I think you're going to see a little bit more of him. He is our resident protester, and he carries a lot of messages for us. So among other things. Okay, so the investor-owned utilities are in the business to make money, and that is what they're putting first. They seem to have forgotten that they are on the hook to us, the communities and the ratepayers, to provide consistent, affordable access to clean and reliable energy, including a fast transition to the clean energy goals of the state and the cleaner air that accompanies it. That we need to make sure that the profit structures and their incentives really do align with the state and community priorities, including full transparency and accountability, including such things as sharing data and giving communities the ability to meaningfully participate in decisions that impact them. Have they been doing that? No. So electricity is way too expensive. It's getting more expensive. Rate increases are already on the books for years in the future. Utilities are really blocking progress, which Dave is going to talk to us about the mechanisms of that and how they yield their power. And they also keep the public in general out of the decision-making process. And that is to just not skip lightly over the fact that they have done a really terrible job with criminally negligent management with the San Bruno gas explosion and the wildfires. And I think everybody really knows that story. So hang on one second. Dave, you have slides, right?
Yep.
Okay, I have to make you co-host, which I did not do, make co-host. Okay, so you should have access to the tools.
Okay.
And I am, again, very excited to introduce Dave Rosenfeld with Solar Rights Alliance, who's just been doing really great work building the coalition to find a way forward so that ratepayers don't continually get squashed. Over to you, Dave.
All right. Thank you, Laura. Love 350 Bay Area. Love you guys. Really, really glad to be on with you all. And thank you, Laura, for that really, really kind intro. Just been key working with you guys on this issue. Laura, you're still host, right? So you're seeing people entering, and I don't have to worry
Yes.
about the button and
Yeah,
everything.
you don't need to worry about that. Just you
Okay.
and your slides. That's it.
All right. So I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to do a little presentation. Actually, before I share, let me just say the presentation I'm about to do is going to be very much focused on the lie that utilities have been telling about rooftop solar And the reason why is because that has been almost the bane of our existence for the last 3 years, is this lie that utilities have told and have been spreading that has become the basis for all of the decisions that the Newsom administration has been making, and in some cases the legislature, but mostly the Newsom administration, that they have been making to undercut and undermine and slow down and kill off rooftop solar in California. And so you may be kind of coming in and being like, why is he talking about this thing? I'm coming at it that way because that is, unfortunately, we kind of have to start with, just what the utilities are saying. And so I'm going to talk a lot about that. But my main point is going to be that rooftop solar is going to solve basically so many of our problems, both environmental, social, and economic. And there's an incredible amount of opportunity on the table here for us to use rooftop solar and battery storage to solve our climate problems, to lower the cost of electricity for all ratepayers, make us more resilient. And so hopefully this ends with kind of what you're looking for also, which is just how can rooftop solar, what's the potential here? And then what do we do to get the ball rolling again, since we've taken a lot of hits? So that's going to be the thrust of what I'm doing. And hopefully it comes together. And I think I can go through this in enough time such that there'll be time for plenty of questions and that kind of thing, which is really where the fun is in the Q&A. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. And I run the Solar Rights Alliance. We're the nonprofit association of California solar consumers. We have a network of about 150,000 solar consumers around the state. And so that's my home team. And then as Laura said, we work in partnership with you all and about, 600 other organizations and cities and schools that are, that care about this stuff and see it as a way to solve a lot of our problems. Can you see my screen okay? All righty. So let's just start with some level setting about rooftop solar. Utilities and other folks that just don't understand the facts will oftentimes say that rooftop solar is something that just white rich people have. And that's just not true. So this is data from the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. They do the definitive study every year on solar demographics. They have a great tool on their website that you can use to kind of do various visualizations. So I pulled from their website. And 60% of California's 2 million rooftop solar customers, 60% are working in middle class. So these are the income bands. You can see my pointer. These are the main income bands that have rooftop solar. This makes up 60%. You've got your 50,000 and under, you got your 50 to 150K annual household income, and then you got your 100 to 150K, right? So this is kind of the solidly right there in the median. This would be more like a household that's like 2 nurses or a Caltrans worker and a line worker or something like that. So here you go. You've got your middle class right here. That's who has the majority who has solar. Over here, you have the breakdown by race and ethnicity, and just a little more than half of all solar users are people of color. And these numbers, by the way, are just looking at single family detached homes. So if we've been pushing them to take a look at solar users that include the multifamily homes that have solar, which is a small but growing part of the market. And if you did, it would show a higher skew towards lower income people and minority communities. There's already over 400 low income apartments with solar that serve about 35,000 renters, and another 1,200 construction projects in the pipeline that will eventually serve another 300,000 renters. And that's just tiny because what we could be doing. But it's just to say these numbers don't even tell the whole story of really how solar in just 15 years has gone from being something for the rich to something that squarely is, is in the hands of the middle and working class. So let's just level set who we're talking about. When the utilities say that rooftop solar customers are to blame for high rates, they're blaming the middle class when they do that. Everyday people that are just struggling to try to control their electricity bill. Another thing to level set is just how it works. Some of you might have rooftop solar, so this is no dub, but for those of you who don't, so the house in the middle has got solar and the 2 houses on the end don't. Most solar users still have to buy electricity from the grid. The solar covers some of their load, but usually not all of it. And so when the solar does cover their load, it does cover their load. It covers their fridge and all, the AC and all, and the heat and all the things. Um, Sometimes the solar, like, about 40% of the solar um, is more than what the household needs at that one time. And so when the solar is making more energy than the house needs, then the extra solar goes essentially to the neighbors. And when it does, the total result is that the utility doesn't have to sell as much electricity to everybody in this neighborhood. And that's the equivalent as if everyone in this neighborhood just got more energy efficient. That's all that's going on here, is that the solar allows a neighborhood, both the houses that have solar and then the adjacent houses that don't have solar, to not have to, the utility does not have to sell as much electricity to those homes. And so it's just another form of energy efficiency. It would be as if the entire neighborhood decided to hang dry their clothing or turn down the AC by 10 degrees or turn off the lights, right? That it's just another form of doing that by people making their own electricity and sharing it with their neighbors. And one important fact here is that solar homes still spend about $80 to $160 a month on utility bills because the sun's just not always shining, and most people still don't have a battery. That will change if we do everything right, but that's not where things are at right now. Okay, a couple more level set things. Um, Even with the pandemic changing kind of the nature of work and all those kinds of things, the peak electricity demand is still happening in the middle of the day. And so this represents electricity usage on August 7th of this year. This is a typical hot summer day when people are firing up their ACs, all over the state. And this is just basically electricity use on a time scale from midnight to midnight, right? And the colors are the different forms of electricity. So this bottom down here, which is, one of the largest, is natural gas. But you've also got your nuclear and your wind. This mustard color is solar farms. And this yellow is rooftop solar. This is California's 2 million solar users. All right. So you can see around 2, 3, 4 o'clock is when the peak electricity demand is happening. Right. And then here's the thing to understand is this is the peak electricity demand on the grid. This is the strain on the grid right here. This is total demand, but this is what the grid has to deliver. In other words, all of this electricity, the big hump right here, is essentially people making their own electricity. This represents billions of dollars in infrastructure that the utilities do not have to build, billions of dollars worth that we do not have to build because people are making it themselves. This also represents avoided blackouts in a really, really big way. This is a really peak hot summer day. And look how rooftop solar just shaved a whole bunch of load off the grid. This is going on all the time, and it rarely gets talked about. And CAISO, which is the agency that basically coordinates, most of the electricity use in the state, they don't even recognize this. If you look at a CAISO chart, it generally looks at this and it pretends like this doesn't exist. And yet this is a huge part of what's going on in California. And then obviously there's a lot of talk at the duck curve, right? Where in the evening, as the sun goes down, those natural gas plants have to get fired up. So yeah, that's obviously still here. But the solution is batteries, more batteries. You can see that's already starting to happen. This is batteries right here. So you can see as we build up battery storage, then we can shave this hump off even more. And then eventually, hopefully, we can just shave all this out of the grid completely. That's the goal. The thing is that the powers that be and even the media don't focus on August 7th type of things. What they tend to focus on are days like this. So you've probably seen the headlines that go, "We have too much solar," or there's an alternative headline, which is like, "Woohoo, California did it. All of the electricity was generated by renewables. We made it to the finish line." Those headlines are the most clickbaity, misleading, confusing, muddy the waters. They are so annoying to me because what they focus on are these rare days in the spring when the sun is shining, the days are getting longer, and it is relatively mild, so people are not using a lot of electricity. These are outlier days. This is not what we build the grid for. This is not a day that really matters one way, shape, or form. So it is true that on days like this, we actually do send some of our electricity out of state. It's called curtailment. I will note that it is the solar from the solar farms and wind farms that get curtailed, not the stuff that's being generated on site. But the point is like, this is really rare. The thing that we need to be focusing on are days like this. And how do we get more of the electricity needs of the state to be met by solar or wind, right? So days like this are just, they get all the headlines, but they're dumb. And also what's really dumb about it is look how much natural gas is still being used on those days. What we need is more batteries, not less solar. Um, and so these are just some level set things to understand like what's going on. But what I just showed you here, I'm sorry to flip back and forth, this whole thing on August 7th, how much solar is shaving demand off the grid and keeping the strain. This has been happening steadily for the last 15 years. Look at this. This is the Energy Commission's forecast since 2004 to the present of how much electricity demand was going to increase. And then this represents actually what happened, like what the peak electricity demand on the grid was. And you can see that it was relatively flat. Essentially, energy planners expected peak load to increase by 15,000 megawatts, and it didn't. And what happened? Consumers essentially bought and built 15,000 megawatts of rooftop solar. And so they essentially prevented this scenario from happening by essentially making their own electricity. And this is like a tremendous accomplishment that rarely gets talked about in the echelons of power. And yet it's like amazing. What we did is we essentially shaved 15,000 megawatts of load off the grid and prevented billions of dollars of infrastructure to get built. This could have been better. Billions more could have been prevented from being built, but that's going to be the next part of the story that I'm about to tell. But before I do, that's looking back, but let's look ahead to electrification, right? The last 15, 20 years, yes, the economy grew. Yes, the population grew. Yes, peak, demand grew. But we ain't seen nothing yet if we're going to really be serious about electrifying, right? People buying those electric cars and whatnot. So in the next 5 years alone, this is how much electricity consumption is expected to increase due to electrification. It's going to be like another 60 terawatt hours annually of electricity consumption. And if we return rooftop solar to the 2021 levels of growth, we're going to get to how it's not growing right now, but if we returned it to growth, this is how much of that additional electricity demand could get soaked up by people making their own electricity, and thus the grid will not have to have as much strain and have to serve it. So we can continue to let rooftop solar just wither and die and require then essentially all this additional electricity need to be met by wind and solar farms and long distance transmission and distribution. Or we could take a chunk out of that by empowering consumers to make a lot of that electricity themselves. This is the choice we have now. And the choice is going to be the difference between whether we meet our climate goals or not, and whether or not this thing is going to be so expensive that people are just going to leave California. Or worse, they're going to revolt against these climate change goals and go, we don't want it, because it seems like it's resulting in more electricity. So this is our choice point right now. And the utilities have been trying to make the choice point go towards lots of solar farms and wind farms, not a lot of rooftop solar, et cetera. And what I'm hopefully going to show you is that that would be disastrous. The utilities have been telling a lie, which is that rooftop solar is too expensive, that solar users, because they don't pay their fair share of the grid, they actually ship the cost of the grid over to people who don't have solar, and that's why electricity rates are going up. This is the central utility lie. And we've been working with an energy economist, Richard McCann, Dr. McCann, to dig into, those claims. And what he has found is that that is just nonsense, and that the actual reason why electricity rates are going up is because of utility overspending. And so I want to go through that story with you all. So first off, let's just unpack the claim right up front. The Public Advocate's Office, which is essentially the political arm of the CPUC, so they're just an instrument of the CPUC. The CPUC is an instrument of the governor. The governor has been captured by the utilities. So they put out a report in August that claims that every year, that this year alone, rooftop solar customers are responsible for shifting $8.5 billion of grid costs onto people who don't have solar. That you're to blame for these high electricity rates. That was their claim. They even produced a spreadsheet that showed their calculations. And already we're hearing the governor issued an executive order that repeated this lie. We're hearing legislators repeat this claim. They're going, oh yeah, it's an $8.5 billion cost shift. That's the cost to ratepayers of all you rooftop solar users in 2024 alone. Dr. McCann looked at their calculations, and what he found was that they made so many mistakes, but so many errors that are just obvious errors. Their numbers were wrong. They included lots of omissions. And when you correct for all of those omissions and incorrect numbers, using literally their own spreadsheet, what you end up with is not an $8.5 billion cost shift, but in fact a $2.3 billion savings to all ratepayers. That in 2024, rooftop solar customers actually saved all ratepayers $2.3 billion. All right, and I just want to walk through a little bit, and this is all published. And after this thing, we can send out Dr. McCann's report on all of this, so you can verify it yourself. He's got lots of Excel spreadsheets in there. But the basic thing is as follows. First off, they used the wrong rates. They picked a generic rate that rooftop solar customers are reimbursed for the extra energy they send back to the grid. But any rooftop solar customer knows that the generic rate is not what they pay. You pay time of use rates, and those time of use rates matter, and they make the difference between one number or another. He also ignored the fact that 15% of all solar customers are actually on the CARE program. So the reimbursement they get for the extra energy they share back to the grid is lower than other customers. That makes a difference. They also miscalculated the actual amount of solar energy that the 2 million solar rooftops generate. This is it's a mistake that just shouldn't get made. This is like a very number that, there's a number and everyone knows it, and they use the wrong number. So Dr. McCann corrected for these incorrect rates and the incorrect number of solar output, and already you can deduct $2.17 billion from their $8.5 billion cost shift. Then the second mistake they did was that they assumed that the portion of the solar energy that gets made and consumed on site, that when you consume that energy and you don't then buy electricity from the utility, all of that is a cost shift. And that's completely incorrect, because that assumes that all of us are obligated to buy all of our electricity from the utility, whether we need it or not. If that assumption is correct, then that means that if you go and you hang dry your clothing instead of running the dryer, then you owe the utility money anyway. If you turn off your lights and thus don't pay the utility electricity for the 1 hour that you turned the lights off, you owe them money anyway. If it means that you went and installed insulation that lowered your utility bill because your house now is more insulated, you still owe them money. Of course not, right? We wouldn't be making that argument. The only time they make that argument is when they talk about people making their own electricity with solar panels. About half of all the electricity that solar users generate is consumed on site, and the other half is exported, is essentially sent to the neighbors in the chart that I showed you earlier. So you can basically cut the public advocates number in half, because you just want to take half of that generation out. It doesn't belong in there. And that reduces their cost shift number by 3.99 billion. So now we're down here. Then they omitted a very big thing, which is that what I showed you earlier, which is rooftop solar users. Essentially, the utilities were going to have to essentially deliver 15,000 megawatt hours of more peak electricity load to the state over the last 15 years, had those rooftop solar users not been in existence. And those 15,000 megawatt hours of peak electricity actually has a value to it, because you can actually calculate how much the utilities would have had to have spent to deliver that electricity had the rooftop solar not been there. And Dr. McCann did a very conservative, using very standard energy modeling that everyone uses in this space. And he found that when you just calculate that, that reduces their cost shift number by another 2.46 billion. So now we're getting pretty close down to zero. But there's more, because remember I said earlier that 15% of all solar users are on the CARE program. Well, when CARE customers make their own electricity, that means that they don't have to buy as much from the utility. Remember that ratepayers subsidize people on the CARE program. That means that ratepayers save money because they don't have to subsidize those CARE customers as much. So that knocks down, that saves ratepayers another $720 million. But that's not the end of it, because the public advocate assumed that solar customers don't pay any money they don't buy any electricity from the utility, that their solar covers all of their electricity. But as I told you in the very beginning, solar users pay between $80 to $150 a month in utility bills. So they're actually paying the utility. And when they pay the utility, they are covering the utility's fixed costs. You got to factor that in. So when you factor all that in, now you're down to not only is there not a cost shift at all, but in fact, those of you who are solar customers on this call, congratulations, take a bow. You helped save ratepayers in 2024 alone $2.3 billion. And so this is the fraud that we've been having to deal with for years, is these fake numbers that look like they have something to them, but in fact, they're absolute nonsense. So then let's move on to the real issue that I think the policymakers, instead of blaming and slandering rooftop solar customers who are truly the heroes of the story, why are electricity rates so high? I'm going to skip over some of this stuff just to move thing. Actually, let me just say one thing before I get to why are electricity rates so high. No, actually, I'm done. I'm gonna move through this stuff just in the interest of time. Okay, utility rates are high because utility spending increases. That's it. That's the end of the story. Is the solid line, in this case, this is PG&E. This is their spending on transmission and distribution, basically poles and wires, since 2013. And electricity rate increases track almost one-to-one with the utilities' spending increases on transmission and distribution. There's literally almost a one-to-one ratio. As they spend more in transmission and distribution, the rates go up. This little kind of tight dash line is what the spending would have been had they just stuck to inflation. And you can see their spending is way past inflation, and so have been rates. And this is the same with the two other IOUs as well. So this is Edison, this is San Diego Gas and Electric, very similar kind of pattern. Spending and rates track almost one-to-one. The rate hikes are not being driven by rooftop solar customers making their own electricity and sharing it with their neighbors. The rate hikes are being driven by utility spending on poles and wires. And in fact, when you kind of wrap it all together, more than 90% of the rate hikes of the last bunch of years are driven entirely by spending increases on T&D, transmission and distribution, right? And you might then go, well, but isn't that due to wildfire mitigation? And the answer is no. In fact, about 12% of all utility spending is wildfire mitigation. And over most of the time period over the last 15, 20 years that the spending increases have happened, wildfire mitigation wasn't even really a part of the picture. So wildfire mitigation is important, but it's not what's driving this overspending. And then you might then, go, well, hey, but isn't that spending then to meet just increased electricity demand? But remember what we went through before. Peak electricity demand for the last 20 years has been relatively flat thanks to rooftop solar. And yet, look at the spending increases. This is the same charts I showed you before for all three investor-owned utilities, just going up and up and up. Maybe there is a good reason for this spending increases. Maybe there isn't. Maybe it's 50-50. But the point is, it has nothing to do with rooftop solar, and it has everything to do with their spending increases. And there is a relationship between their spending on poles and wires and utility profits. So this is the profits of each of the three major utilities. You can see it took a dip during the bankruptcy and then right back up to record levels for all three of them. This is not random. The utilities make an 8 to 10% profit off of every dollar that they spend on new transmission and distribution. And even the CPUC, which is like just about the most failed of failed agencies that you can possibly come up with in terms of doing their job, even they have put in writing and acknowledged that the current system incentivizes utilities to spend more than we actually need. And the CPUC admits this, and yet they've been just rubber stamping these spending increases over and over and over again. We're not the only ones who are saying this. Mark Jacobson might be an academic that many of you have heard of. He just put out his own paper that basically just shows that this cost shift argument about rooftop solar is a red herring. The implications of the way this lie has been misused is really big. Rooftop solar has gone off a cliff because of the CPUC's recent decisions changing the rules about how the rooftop solar program works. So you can see this has been essentially rooftop solar adoptions over the last 4 years. And you can see kind of steady as she goes, steady as she goes. Then there was a rush to the gates. This is not, nobody wanted this to happen. This is just the rush to the gates as, excuse me, NEM 3 went into effect. And then you see it went off a cliff and it has not recovered. We're at levels that we've seen 10 years ago in terms of adoptions. And the reason why I did this as color coded is to show you the thing that I showed you at the very beginning, which is this is adoptions by income band. So you can see here the largest share of adoptions for many years has been that $50,000 to $100,000 a year annual income. And you can see also that's who's now, as a result, not able to get rooftop solar, is again that middle class that is desperate to try to get out from under these crazy high rates. Those are the folks that were getting rooftop solar before, and they are the ones who now are unable to get it in the same numbers that they were able to get it before because of the decisions. So this whole thing is, in my opinion, an example of the oligarchs and the elite war on the middle and working class. You couldn't ask for a better example of, and the way that they misuse equity to try to justify essentially an attack on the middle and working class. This chart, I believe, paints this in just about the starkest reality that you can have. For those of you who are policy wonks out there, you might remember that the CPUC said that their NEM 3 decision was intended to grow battery storage, but that's nonsense. We can actually predict pretty easily how much battery storage would have grown if they had just left the existing system in place. And we would have had more batteries today installed had they just left things alone. This is what battery installations have been. This is what they would have been had they just left things alone. So no, while battery storage, of course, is increasing, it's nowhere close to where it could have been had they just left things alone. So that certainly hasn't led to what they wanted it to be. Massive clean energy job losses. Again, you want to talk about a war on the working class and the middle class. There were 65,000 rooftop solar jobs. We've lost about a third of them. And these are jobs that were skilled. People had to study for years to get good at it. They paid well, about $70,000 a year, full health benefits generally on the whole. And these jobs are not going to come back. And these are people that are going to go into other fields. It's a brain drain. And at a time when we should be accelerating our clean energy job force, we've shed a third of, of the rooftop solar job force. And then this really just turns our clean energy goals into a joke. So if you take Gavin Newsom at his word that he wants to get 90% to our decarbonization goals by 2035, what that would mean is solar alone, we've got to add about 10 gigawatts of new solar every single year. These last couple of years, we haven't hit that. So the yellow is rooftop solar, the blue is solar farms. And you can see there's only 1 year where we came close. For the most part, and every time we don't hit it, the delta has to get rolled over to the next year, right? So we're behind in a really big way. This, had the Newsom administration not thrown rooftop solar off a cliff, this would have been, this was kind of the 2023 rooftop solar level. It would have kind of kept growing, and the rest would have had to get made up by solar farms. And that would have been a pretty tall order already, as it is. But now here we are. This is what you're going to get out of rooftop solar if the situation doesn't change. And the rest of it is going to have to get pulled up by solar farms. I don't think so. I mean, even if they do all their permitting reform and that kind of thing, there's just a limit, a hard limit to how fast and how much they can deploy. And so we've just now really made it much harder for the state to get to its clean energy goals, which of course means those power plants, the natural gas plants, peaker plants, air pollution, all that kind of stuff. So hopefully this is kind of clear that rooftop solar and batteries would be a big benefit to the state, not just from a climate change or clean energy or even an individual consumer perspective, but it actually reduces the cost of the grid. If we want to reduce the cost of the grid, if we want to make electricity affordable so that people will be more likely to support this climate change push, will be more likely to support electrification, this is the way to do it. And if we don't get a handle on what's causing electricity rates to go up, then we're not going to get there. The people of California will rightfully so just say, no, thank you, I don't want it. We should be celebrating solar consumers as heroes. We should be giving people more opportunities to be heroes by putting solar panels on their roof. The potential for rooftop solar is enormous. So this blue down here is existing rooftop solar that has been built to date, about 16 gigawatts of rooftop solar. This is the National Renewable, NREL, the National Renewable Energy Lab. What they predict is that there's almost 84 gigawatts of additional rooftop solar that we could be putting up in California. The orange is remaining on the rooftops, and then the gray is like parking lots and factories and large commercial buildings. So much potential. We could be doing this. Like it's really amazing. But we've got to just get this lie out of the picture. We have got to convince our lawmakers that this is a lie. We've got to have them understand that rooftop solar is one of their best tools to achieve energy affordability, not just at the individual consumer level, but at the systems level. And we've got to get our legislators to stand up to the utilities, stand up to the utilities labor union, stand up to Governor Newsom, and insist that whoever the next governor is does a better job than this governor did in managing the state's clean energy transition. So that's, and then there's lots of things that we can be doing from a policy standpoint, but the most important set of things would just be, let's not do any more harm. So we got to stop these fixed charges that are about to go into effect, or we got to at least make sure it doesn't get any bigger than $24 a month. That fixed charge is going to be terrible if it's allowed to keep growing. We've got to stop any new solar taxes, which every year the Newsom administration proposes solar taxes. We got to stop that. The Newsom Newsom's executive order that came out like about 2 weeks ago implies that this year he's going to be going after NEM 2 customers and basically putting a proposal forward that would force them to have to go on to NEM 3, which would basically undermine their contracts and throw the whole market into further disarray. So we've got to just do no more harm, right? Like that's the first order of business. Then we got to start thinking big again. And there's a lot of ways that we can get this whole thing growing again. We could obviously go and fix NEM 3, but there's other things we could leave NEM 3 alone and do other things. So there's no limit to ideas on how to get the whole thing growing again. And then the final thing we have to do is we have to just reform the utilities in a really, really big way. And the most important thing we have to do is we've got to fix that incentive that they have, where they basically get paid for building more infrastructure. We have to change the incentive so that if they get paid for the things that actually make sense. And Hawaii has started doing some really interesting policy work there. I think in some ways, this is one of the most important things we could do. Yes, we need to hold the CPUC accountable and we need to like cut the utilities down. You know, we got to stop some of that corruption that's going on. But the most important thing we have to do, I think, is we have to change that incentive. And I think lawmakers are ready for that conversation if we do our job and get them, make sure they have the facts and they understand the facts and they embrace the facts and they start to use the facts to guide their decision making. We've got lots, we can send this stuff out to Laura, you know, for people that want the follow-up information, but we've also put together a website that has a lot of this stuff all there kind of in a more like kind of readable level. It's just our website /cost shift, and we can get that out. There's things that you can do. And then I think we can move to questions. Thank you all for just everything that you're doing to try to make the world a better place and you know, improve the lives of the people on the planet.
Hey, you can, whoops, I will stop sharing. Elena.
Yeah, I had a few questions. Very early on in the slide, you said that the solar customer shares their energy with their neighbors, and that's kind of a misleading way to put it. I think what you mean is that the electrons move to the closest near place, but it's not that these people get subsidized rates or that someone's giving them energy for free. So it's kind of funny when you say they share their solar with their neighbors. But it does lead to another thing, which is that, you know, the huge distribution and transmission costs. Well, if actually solar customers are sharing with their nearest people, that they should get a credit, and their neighbors should probably get a credit for the distribution and transmission costs, which are like 3 times the size of one's bill. Do you know what I'm talking about?
No, I think I do, but I want to make sure.
All right. So you had a slide where you showed the guy in the middle had solar, and you said, oh, he's sharing his energy, his solar energy with his neighbors. Well, that's what I found misleading. What do you mean when you say that? Other than that the electrons go to the closest place?
Yeah, that's what I mean. The electrons go to the closest place,
Right.
which can be your neighbor. It could be maybe 2 houses down, 3 houses down. Yeah.
Right. But it sounds like they're getting this for free or something. That's what's
I
misleading.
see. That's not what I meant, but that's good feedback. So I'll make sure I'm clear about that when I describe it. Yeah.
The second thing is that most of the costs these days on our bills have to do with distribution and transmission. Well, if the solar customers are actually distributing close by, people shouldn't have to pay as great transmission and distribution costs because they're getting it locally, right? They're not getting it from, these huge transmission. So there should be a credit for that.
I mean, the last 20 years has been a squandered opportunity. I mean, let me just kind of just take that with your point and just kind of even take it more big picture, which is just utility spending on poles and wires has gone up 300% over the last 20 years, even though peak electricity demand is flat, even though wildfire mitigation was not even a thing. And even with that, solar customers, we can calculate, have saved the state billions of dollars. But that billions that has been saved is actually quite small to what could have been saved had regulators been actually doing their jobs. And then, yeah, we all would have saved a lot of money and avoided, we wouldn't be in the mess we were in today had they actually taken all that seriously.
One last question for you, which is when you're thinking about batteries, how are you thinking about EVs? As lots of people are getting batteries, they're mobile batteries, and soon they will be possible to use as, for our houses.
Yeah, I mean, this is, again, if we were really thinking pedal to the metal, right? Like a lot of people already have a battery sitting in their driveway. And then also there's, on the market, you can buy a battery. And sometimes you might want to do both. You might want to do one or the other. My house, I'm waiting for my car to become my battery.
Right.
People will get a battery. It's just we can have
asking whether you were in these charts you're showing us, whether you're thinking about the proliferation of EVs as batteries.
100%. Yeah. I mean, we need like 2 million batteries. Like we should be this. If we had real leadership, they'd be thinking 2 million batteries deployed in the next 5 years. And to get 2 million batteries, you're going to need to take advantage of the electric vehicle fleet. Like why? We should leave nothing on the table. That's kind of, I think, the point. And we're leaving a lot on the table right now because of the cockamamie and corrupt policies that, we've seen coming out of the administration. So yeah, 100%.
Jack.
Yeah, thanks so much for addressing this cost shift issue because it drives me crazy. And I really appreciate all your data. The way I like to think about it is that if the grid were shrinking, as could possibly happen with natural gas, if we actually get people off of natural gas more and more, there will be fewer and fewer people. And it's possible that the remaining people would have to pay extra. But in the case of the electric grid, it's, as you show, growing enormously. And so there is no fewer and fewer people are having to pay more and more. It should be that everybody is saving. And then if the people get solar panels, they happen to save more, but there's no cost shift. It's a savings shift, if anything. What do you think about that argument?
Yes, I think that's exactly right. I mean, again, solar customers pay for the grid. They have to because, right, like they pay for the grid when the sun is not shining because most people don't have a battery. And I think what you've seen is like this whole idea that there's these fixed costs, like it's a fixed pie. And if some people don't, if they make their own electricity, then other people have to basically pay for the pie. It's nonsense. Like the utility spending on the biggest part of the pie has no relationship to actually what, the people of the state actually need. And so it's just obvious that the whole thing is more fluid and is more of a political decision at this point than it is some of the decision that's on the merits. And so all we're just saying is that if you actually let people and encourage them to generate their own electricity, then the utility spends less. And if they spend less, then the cost is less for everybody. And that's a savings. So yes, I think you put it very nicely.
Marty.
Thanks. Yeah, this was a great presentation. Thank you. The piece that I'm thinking about more is, their transmission costs. And what you always hear is they have to underground the wires. They have to deal with the wildfires. They have to grow the grid, so they have to build more wires. So, and there's this impression, a general impression that I have that I think the public shares, that that's why costs are so high. You implied that you have knowledge that that's only a fraction. I think we need more transparency on those costs. And can we see a breakdown of what actually how they are spending these these increases, and I assume these increases are approved by the CPUC, which we know is in their court, but that's the part that I really feel I want to understand more is what are they charging there? And a corollary for that is a while back, I think it was with NEM 2.0, maybe it was 3.0, the policy wonk, Danny Cullenward, who consults with the state, had made a case that some of these charges, like for wildfire, are really more state of California concerns and should be pulled out of the transmission fees and put somewhere else in the general budget. And I don't know whether you think that's a worthy consideration as well, that somehow we shouldn't be paying them as part of our utility bill, that the state should be bearing that cost in a different way. I realize it all comes back to taxpayers, but still. Anyways, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is the right now the facts, the state officials are not being very honest about what's happening. So I think that's the first thing. So like, as you saw, wildfire mitigation is right now just 12% of all utility spending. And so that's kind of important. Like to say that the rate hikes are being driven by wildfire mitigation is incorrect. In the future,
excuse me, Dave, is that their data? I forgot the data source for that 12%.
That's the utilities filings. Yeah, that's
okay. That's their filings. Thank you. Okay.
This is Dr. Richard McCann is an energy economist, and the stuff I showed you is his work. And so, but just to kind of go back just one step, maybe not nobody, but certainly we are not. Hopefully you're not taking from this message, oh, we don't need solar farms and wind farms, or that we don't need transmission and distribution. If we're serious about decarbonizing, we're going to need everything, right? Like I assume that's kind of this crowd is serious about that kind of thing. What the data is showing is that poles and wires are the most expensive part of the grid. It has become, and it is certainly what's driving the rate increases. And as a result, it is, and we're going to have to do more poles and wires. That's the thing, is we're going to have to build more poles and wires in the coming years because we screwed up, which is terrible because we squandered the last 20 years so badly in terms of spending, but we're going to have to. So what this data is telling us is going forward, we would be very smart to focus like a laser on strategies that reduce the need to have to spend as much on poles and wires. We're still going to have to spend, but how can we shave off that spending? And what the data shows is that when encouraging people to install rooftop solar and pair it with a battery is one of the best tools that we have to shave the cost of building poles and wires. And so I'm not trying to make an argument that like, oh, we can wave that stuff away. We can't, unfortunately, but we can sure as heck reduce that cost and reduce it by a heck of a lot. But we're not going to get there if the state government and our leaders are essentially don't acknowledge that that's a truth. And in fact, are kind of blaming rooftop solar for the rates rather than the other way around. So I don't know if that directly answers your question, but I think that's the most important thing, is to just look at it as a tool to mitigate a very, very big and important cost, not like, the silver bullet that solves all of our problems.
Yeah, I just want to underline that a little bit, and then we'll get to Jonathan. There was actually a really great graph that showed it, like one bar with all, utility scale, and then the other bar if we can keep growing solar at the same rate. So all of those, what I call big bulldozer projects, do a lot of damage. And those are the projects that we have incentivized the for-profit utilities to do. So stay tuned. Part of this series is going to also be a conversation, very brief, about the other kind of technological advances called grid enhancing technologies for short. It's a whole basket of things. And right now, the public utilities are choosing the super expensive, let's bury lines, or let's create a new path for redundant towers to increase the throughput of delivering electricity. And there are cheaper ways to do that. And so that's also part of what we need to fight for, is making sure that those technologies are being embraced instead of shunted aside because they don't earn the utilities as much money. So Jonathan.
I thank you, and thanks, Dave, for a very interesting presentation. I'm a rooftop solar customer and an environmentalist. but I have, over the years, sort of imbued and accepted some of the critiques of the rooftop solar program. So I'm interested in your critique of those critiques and appreciate it, but did have a couple of questions that reflect my own kind of skepticism about your argument. One is, if we accept, for example, that transmission and distribution spending increases represent the bulk of the cost growth for utilities that they need to get reimbursed through rates, I think the argument of the rooftop solar critics is that those costs are real, but they're getting shifted. And they're getting shifted because allegedly rooftop solar customers aren't paying those full costs. And I think, to me, there was a possibly false equation of rooftop solar and energy efficiency. I think you're quite right. The more someone adopts energy efficiency, the less they pay to the utilities. And you could say that that creates a cost shift. But I think most of us kind of acknowledge that energy efficiency is, generally a good thing. But isn't there a difference in that rooftop solar customers are getting reimbursed at full retail rates for the energy that they deliver back into the grid? And thus they're in effect offsetting most of the fixed costs, and I would include much of transmission and distribution under that.
So let's just pause right there. It's really important not to confuse those two things, because that's what the utilities are doing, is essentially conflating those two things together. But it's really important to separate them out, because they really are two different things. One part of so just going back to the beginning, a portion of the energy that your panels make, you consume behind the meter.
Right.
A portion of the solar that your panels make gets exported, right? And is used, it gets delivered to your neighbors. That portion that's exported, yes, you get a credit for that. The portion that is not exported, that's consumed behind the meter, there is no credit for that. You're just consuming it behind the meter. That portion that's behind the meter is the same thing as energy efficiency.
Right.
You just found different ways to meet your needs.
And you're saying that the PAO and other critical groups are counting even the solar that you consume on site at the time you generate it against as a cost shift.
Literally, that's what they do. They calculate the energy, and they basically multiply all those kilowatt hours by the retail rate. And then they say, this is what you would have paid the utility had you not had those solar panels. It's a cost shift. It's a cost shift.
Okay.
It's the same thing as if everyone turned off their lights and then they calculated it out and said that's a cost shift. And it's the same thing as if you grow your own vegetables.
Right.
Right. And then, but then that's why, vegetable prices go up at the supermarket. It has no place in energy modeling. It has no place in any kind of economic modeling. It's just a consumer's choice. So, and that's, about 40–50% of solar generation is consumed behind the meter. And in all of the cost shift numbers that you ever see, whether it's the PAO or someone else, they always include behind the meter. So just immediately you can just slash that number in half. So then moving to the exports, right? Yes, you have to account for the fact that solar consumers get a credit for that energy that they share with the grid. And it is a totally legitimate question to say, what should that credit be? That credit should be the fair value of that solar energy relative to other sources that go in. The PAO's analysis, once Dr. McCann isolated out self-consumption, right? That's a big drop. Then then any reasonable person then goes, so what is that a cost or is it a benefit? And then what PAO did, and frankly, all the other kind of institutions that have done a cost shift analysis make the same mistake, is their numbers are just whacked. Honestly. So that's what Dr. McCann essentially did, was went in and said, let's make sure that we're using the exact rates that solar users are reimbursed with, which we know with time of use, right? Like the electricity that you sell back to the grid is cheaper now during the day. So you have to kind of actually use time of use rates, not just the generic retail rate. I already mentioned care customers and how 15% of all solar customers are on care. They get a different rate. And that also displaces the subsidy that ratepayers pay. So you got to include that. Solar users pay for the grid when they buy electricity from the grid. So you have to include that. And then, of course, there's just the amortized cost of what the utility didn't have to buy over the last 15 years through power purchasing agreements because, right, you were making your own electricity. So when you roll, you literally just line item that stuff and you stack it. You either correct the PAO's numbers, right? Or you just add in what they omitted and just bit by bit by bit. And like all it was, I mean, he's got it now on his website. The Canary, I saw someone put the Canary article, you can link to his, we can send it.
Right.
Excel chart, you can just go through the calculations yourself. You get to a $2.3 billion net benefit to ratepayers. And so it's just, so that what he did was essentially goes, let's look at exports and let's look at the whole picture. And this is what you get.
So that's very helpful and enlightening. Most of us are not sort of technical economists. And so we are, I think it's unfortunate but true, we often are kind of engaged in motivated thinking. I think many of us as solar customers kind of want to believe we're on the side of nobility and so forth. How do we
Jonathan,
distinguish?
we're
No,
actually, if we could.
I'm going to very quickly here.
Okay, that would be good.
Okay, thank you. And I genuinely do appreciate this. Putting aside the PAO, which you've argued is fundamentally a political organization through its ties to the CPUC, how do we gauge the credibility of McCann, who I believe his analysis was paid for by the solar industry, and you can correct me if I'm wrong,
Yep.
versus UC Energy Institute economists, who in general I've come to trust, and that may be wrongly so, but they seem to be more independent. What can you comment on the credibility of those?
Well, I mean, the Haas Energy Institute at Berkeley took $250,000 from the IOUs in contributions. So I think what's important is we've got to let data, like Severin Bornstein, who's at UC Berkeley, when you get under the hood of his calculations, he does the same things that PAO did. I mean, this is when E3, which is the consulting firm that the CPUC has hired to do their own cost benefit analysis, they do the same things. I mean, this is pretty standard fare now at this point. The difference is that Dr. McCann really dug in and now has done a paper and has an Excel chart. So it's like more kind of transparently laid out than ever before. I think he's done a real service to the discussion. So we just have to make this data driven. And as you said, most people are not energy economists. I think the contribution of Dr. McCann's work is that I think you don't have to be an energy economist to understand the errors that the other side is making in their calculations. And what this does mean, though, is people like us do have to level up. Like, I'm not an economist. I have a BA, so I've had to force myself to like get schooled up. So, in this stuff, and I think we all do. The website that we've set up, the solarrights.org/cost shift, has a lot of the stuff that I put, but it's in like more kind of 10th grade English. But it has the citations, and I think citations are really important when we're delivering this information. All the slides that I gave you, we've got citations. We want to give people a way that they can go and independently verify the information that we're putting together. That's the best we're going to do. Like we just have to level up. We all have to get really, really good at communicating this information. And we've tried to help Dr. McCann. He's a good communicator, so I think you'll find his paper that he's published is pretty easy to follow. But like, even his Excel chart, it's not that hard to follow if you put a little time and attention to it. So that's what I would encourage people to do is like, take this on as a homework assignment and make yourself an expert. I think you actually can do it in this one.
Thank
So,
you.
we of course agree. I mean, that's what we're trying to do here at 350 Bay Area is have our big team of people who are used to contacting their elected officials and have them start telling the story. Dave, do you have 5 more minutes? Because I would love to hear from Claire.
Yeah.
Has her hand raised. Claire, right?
Of course, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
But thanks, Laura, and I'll try to be succinct. But also, thank you, Dave. I really thought that was a very clear and excellent presentation of a really complicated topic and a really important one. And I think, in fact, for Jonathan, and for those who haven't really thought about this, in addition to looking at Richard McCann's blog post, I'd also very much recommend the Canary Media article that Laura put a link to in the chat. And he does a really good job of, putting it in journalist words, but covering substance. The other thing, Jonathan, you sort of expressed doubt about the proportion of costs due to transmission and distribution. Look at your bill. The amount that you're being billed for energy is under 50% of your bill. It's not so easy to read your PG&E bill either, but this is not something that Dave pulled out of a hat.
No, I wasn't disputing that. I was just saying that.
Anyway, Jonathan,
Right.
I've got to go too. So
Thank you.
let me just make a couple of other points. The second one is, one of the reasons it sounds plausible is something that Dave said that I'd like to reinforce. It's like the utilities say, well, if the solar people don't pay those costs, other people have to pay them. But that assumes that there are fixed costs, whereas in fact, with the rooftop solar, you should be decreasing this huge spending on poles and wires. And so that basically benefits everybody. So over time, they're not fixed costs, they're going down. So it's not that, the people without solar are going to have to be paying them. It's that rates should be going down if the utilities were held to account or had the correct incentives. And that's Vibrant Clean Energy did modeling of this. And their prediction was that electricity rates should go down. So it's not just, Dave's hypothesis. The third point I'd like to make is, for me, the biggest benefit of my battery is resilience. PG&E turns off the power and I still have power. There is no value that the PUC puts on resilience for rooftop solar. And, solar out in the desert isn't going to help if a transmission line goes down. So they're sort of undervaluing what rooftop solar can do systematically. And the value that's not there may be something that would be very important to ratepayers. And finally, they timed this very cleverly because demand has been flat. My household has 3 electric vehicles. My electric bill last year was $7,000, and I have solar panels. So that's just a taste of what is going to happen as we move electrification. That's a whole other discussion, but I think it's so important that we get in front of this cost shift disinformation. So thanks, Dave.
Yes, a big round of applause for Dave. I promise you a great presentation. Dave totally delivered, super succinct. And yeah, we can do this. This is not, we don't have to be PhD scientists here. We just need to be able to articulate this. And I think, Dave, do we have your permission to use some of these slides?
Yeah. So I put it in the chat.
Yeah.
Slides, and let me actually put the website too in the chat, like share away, make it your own, like this is not proprietary whatsoever. We want you to level up and, get out there and spread the data, right? This isn't an argument we're making. We're spreading data, and that's how I think about it.
Well, and then this vision of the future grid that is very, that has this big distributed component. Does distributed networks are more resilient, period. But that also means more local jobs, more local weigh-in on, how electricity is generated and distributed. And it is such a critical part of getting us quickly to a clean energy grid, because the answer is not all big bulldozer projects. We do need them. And it's going to make us sad in some cases where we have to build some of these big facilities for solar, but we have to get there through all these different means. So let me know if you want to get involved in this work. We're really going big on this. We meet with our legislators all the time. Little hat tip to Kathy Carriage, who helps us with that, and the rest of the legislative team. And we will be, if you don't want to hop in right now, we'll be providing updates through our newsletters. So thank you, Dave. Always good to see you.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, 350
Yeah.
Bay Area. You guys are great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.